Welcome back. I am Jared Case, curator of film exhibitions at the Dryden Theater and the George Eastman Museum, with another recommendation. Not a streaming recommendation today. I thought I'd do something a little bit different. It's the beginning of May. Temperatures are rising, sun's coming out, hopefully where you are, and we can go out and do things, but we can't go out into public yet. We can get out of the house, go for a run, do some gardening, maybe mow the lawn, but we don't want the film conversation to end. So what I do in these instances is I put on a podcast, an audio program you can listen to on your phone or other device. I've been listening to podcasts for about 13 years now, and I've developed some favorites, particularly in the genre of film podcast. So I thought I'd bring some of those to your attention, and hopefully you can find something entertaining and worthwhile for you to listen to as well. So the gold standard for podcasts that I've found is called Film Spotting. It's out of Chicago. It's been going on for over 15 years now. It's hosted by Adam Kempenaar and Josh Larson, and it's actually carried on that local PBS station in Chicago now. Their standard format is to choose a film to have a discussion about. That's the anchor of the episode. And they are self-selecting in that they want to watch films that they enjoy. They don't choose films just to critique them. They want to watch films that they enjoy and share that conversation with other people. So 20 to 30 minutes of discussion on that chosen film. So a good in-depth discussion. And then they move on to other things such as top 5 lists or Massacre Theater. Well, something they've added in the past is they call marathons, where they take a group of films and watch them in an effort to address a blind spot in their film education. So the most recent one that they are completing now is based on Bette Davis, 4 of her films. In the fall, they did Dietrich and von Sternberg, as well as contemporary Chinese films. So they're looking to expand their filmic knowledge and share those conversations with everyone. One thing that they've added this year, particularly since we have the stay-at-home orders, is an oeuvre view. So that means that they're taking one filmmaker, a director, and going through that filmography chronologically. And in this case, it's Christopher Nolan, with the intent of leading up to the release over the summer of Tenet, whether that film comes out or not. But they're going through Christopher Nolan's filmography and having discussions about those. So that is the first one that I would recommend for new movies. A sister to that podcast is called The Next Picture Show, and this is hosted by 4 critics, staff members from the former Dissolve, Genevieve Koski, Tasha Robinson, Keith Phipps, and Scott Tobias. And their format is to take a recent release and pair it with an older release, generally at least 20 years old, and look at the two in conversation with each other. So over the award season, they looked at 2 different versions of Little Women, or they looked at the killing of a Chinese bookie in relation to Uncut Gems, or they looked at 1917 in relation to Gallipoli. Always taking these older films and connecting them with thematically or stylistically with something that's coming out now. So that's 1 episode per week. So each 2-week period is a pairing that they go through. And that's a really great podcast as well. If you're looking for more podcasts that go through filmographies chronologically, I'd recommend the Blank Check podcast. This is hosted by critic David Sims and actor Griffin Newman. And essentially what they're doing, based on the name of the podcast, Blank Check, are they're looking at directors who have been given sort of carte blanche to make a film because of a previous success, whether it's Christopher Nolan or it's the Wachowskis or it's M. Night Shyamalan. Most recently, they have done Jonathan Demme and Michael Mann. So they've gone through several of these filmographies and are looking at it chronologically. Very funny, very humorous, but also really knowledgeable. Great film discussion, and particularly since they focus on that one director and take it all the way through. So you get a sense in this sort of proximity of time of the filmography and how it evolves over time. So really great podcast there. If you're looking for in-depth conversation, go no further than The Projection Booth, hosted by Mike White. This is a film podcast that can last up to 6 hours in length. Mike goes into great detail with a rotating stable of guests about a particular film, and he accents that with interviews that he gets with some of the people that have worked on the film or people that have written about the film, and it goes into great length. Now, Mike's taste runs to the more obscure, whether it's horror or foreign films, but he does handle films, say, from film noir or from Hollywood's past that you might be familiar with. I would recommend going through and picking out the episodes that you want to listen to and getting ready to sit down for a long, detailed conversation about those. KCRW out of Santa Monica, California has a couple of great podcasts as well. These are a little bit shorter. Weekly, The Business comes out, and this talks about the business of Hollywood as well as television, and that's a really great sort of update on the issues that are going on right now, whether it's Me Too or it's the writers' possibly strike coming up in the near future. Elvis Mitchell, a fantastic interviewer, has a weekly or semi-weekly show called The Treatment, where he interviews most of the time film personalities, although he does get into television and to comic books and fashion as well. But Elvis is such a great interviewer that he's always a joy to listen to, and he's got great guests. One of my favorite episodes is actually with Quentin Tarantino. More than any other filmmaker, Quentin really talks as if he's an archivist, which was such a joy to hear. So I recommend going back and looking at that. If you want a sense of the business from across the pond in Great Britain, the film program produced by BBC 4 Radio is another great one that I listen to, and it talks about not only recent films, but also talks about revivals. There's some great conversations with film distributors around the festivals and whether or not something is getting picked up or what the rumblings are around that. There are a couple of great series, such as Pitch Battle, where each episode someone would bring in a novel that could be adapted into a film, and their pitch for that is how it would be handled and how it would be turned into a film. As well as Neil Brand does some great stuff on music in that podcast as well. If you're looking for interviews, I would recommend the DGA Directors Guild of America has a podcast called The Director's Cut. And this takes a recent film and has the director of that film be interviewed by an existing director. So it's really a professional conversation, and those can be very, very insightful. Obviously, it's calmed down a little bit recently, but there's hundreds of episodes of backlog for recent films in the past 5 years that you can look at. So I'd recommend that one. If you're going beyond and getting it sort of to the next meta level, not just about the films or the people that make the films, but what about the people who write about the films? And that's what the Cinephiliacs is dedicated to. Cinephiliacs, hosted by Peter Labuza. Peter goes and interviews people who are critics or authors. Maybe they work at a Nitrate Film Festival and they're interviewed on there as well. So, truth be told, I've been on there as well as on the Projection Booth podcast. And the last one I did with Peter talked about Dead Reckoning the year before we actually showed it at the Nitrate Picture Show. So he's talking to people whose lives have been film and interviewing them, and then we focus on a specific title and talk about that in depth. A couple more that I want to bring up. The Film Comment podcast is going. Film Comment has their own podcast. They've been doing some episodes from home recently. The Slate Culture Gabfest is not specifically about film, but they do often talk about new releases and things that are in pop culture. And I know that Dana Stevens, one of the regular hosts, is writing a book on Buster Keaton, so I'm very much looking forward to that. And also, if you're local to the Rochester area and you're a fan of The Little, you might want to check out the Movies in a Microphone podcast. Scott Pukos does that from the Little Theater, and every once in a while they'll give you a little update on what's going on. The last couple that they did were centered around the award season and the Oscars, so that's good. That's a long one, a great update. Hopefully you'll come back for another streaming recommendation, but in between now and then, go ahead and take a look at some podcasts, and we'll be back. See ya.